Good evening, sweetheart. It's Maggie. Come sit with me. Let's make this night a gentler one. There's a quiet kind of brightness sitting on my window tonight. Not the loud type of brightness that demands attention, but the softer kind. The kind that finds its way into a room as if it knows exactly where to land. The December sky has been shifting all afternoon, moving from a muted gray to that pale silver wash Seattle sometimes brings in the evenings. It's the kind of sky that looks like it's been thinking all day and finally decided to sigh. I moved my rocking chair a few inches closer to the window earlier, not because the view changed, but because something about the light felt like it was calling for company. At 63, I've learned to answer when soft things call. Though, let me tell you, moving that chair felt like I had personally negotiated a peace treaty between my knees and the wooden floor. Age brings wisdom and apparently sound effects. Lily settled beside me once I finished adjusting everything, her small weight leaning against my ankle as if she were anchoring me to the moment. She does that sometimes. Dogs somehow know when a night wants to be listened to. And tonight, the night is definitely speaking. The window pane is cooler than usual. I noticed it when I rested my fingertips there a moment ago. The glass held a quiet cold, the kind that reminds you December has come to sit at your doorstep, even if it hasn't knocked yet. A few drops of rain trail down the glass, moving slowly as if hesitating before joining the rest of the world below. Rain always hesitates here. It has a thoughtful rhythm, not like spring rain that chatters, or summer rain that arrives with a certain swagger. December rain, it thinks before landing. I warmed my hands around my cup, chamomile again, though tonight it seems to taste a little different. Not sweeter, not stronger, but more patient, like it knows the evening needs a softer kind of kindness. The steam rises in those slow spirals, the ones I love watching. The quiet ballet that disappears right when you start to understand it. Steam has never been reliable, but it has always been honest. A moment earlier, when the heater clicked on, its warmth drifted upward and mixed with the faint cool seeping through the window edges. That merging of warm and cold felt like a conversation, not an argument, just two temperatures trying to find middle ground. Funny how heat and cold make peace faster than most people do. As I watched the light gather around the window frame, My mind wandered back to a winter long ago, December of 2008, when the furnace in our old house broke and we had to wear scarves indoors for 2 whole days. We kept laughing about it, even though our breath looked like little ghosts floating through the living room. I don't miss the cold, but I miss the laughter it forced out of us, those unexpected giggles that made the hardship feel warmer than it had any right to be. Memory never brings back the cold the way it was. It brings back the sound of 2 people warming each other in place of a heater that refused to cooperate. Tonight's window has that same shape, the shape of a moment waiting quietly to be remembered someday. I can feel it. Some evenings have that quality, a softness, a readiness, a stillness that makes the room breathe differently, that watch the light settle into the folds of the curtain, turning the fabric a gentle amber. It felt like the room was exhaling straight into my bones. There's something about amber light that loosens the tired parts of a person. I leaned back in the chair, and for a moment, I let myself rest in the simplest way possible, not thinking, not trying, not holding anything up, just being. There's a stillness only winter evenings can carry, a kind of hush that seems to say, "You've done enough today. Let me take it from here." And tonight, I'm letting the evening take the weight. The neighborhood outside looks different through this window, a little softer, a little more forgiving. Even the street light feels gentler tonight, as if it dimmed itself to match the room's breath. A few houses down, I can see Dorothy's living room lamp glowing through her curtains. She uses the same yellow bulb she's used since 1996. I know this because she once warned me that if she ever changed it, the world might collapse from shock. She's probably right. Some bulbs would riot if removed after that many years. There's comfort in knowing other lamps glow at the same time as mine. That quiet, unspoken company between homes that don't need to speak to feel connected. The world outside isn't loud tonight, and for once, my heart isn't either. The cup is warm again in my hands, and as I bring it closer, I can feel the steam brushing my cheek, like the soft touch of someone saying nothing, but saying enough. A light like this doesn't ask to be bright. It only asks to be present. And tonight, present is all I need. I let my thumb run along the wooden sill. There's a small notch there, the one I've never sanded down. It's been part of this house longer than I have, and somehow I've grown fond of it. Imperfections are just memories that didn't ask permission. At my age, I'm learning to love things just as they are, including myself. The evening sits beside me now, quiet and unhurried, like an old friend who knows your stories without needing to ask. I don't know why tonight feels softer than usual, but it does. Maybe the window knows something I don't. Maybe December is trying to start gently. Or maybe, and most likely, quiet nights like this arrive exactly when we're finally ready to hold them. And so, sweetheart, let's sit here a little longer with the window, with the rain, with the gentle amber light that seems to know our names, even when we whisper them softly. The night hasn't finished unfolding yet, and I'm here with it, breathing in whatever quiet it wants to offer. When I walked back toward the sitting room, the quiet followed me, the way certain evenings do, with a patience that feels almost intentional, like the hush itself had decided to stay close enough to steady my breathing, but far enough not to interrupt my thoughts. The lamp's glow stretched across the wooden floor, thin and warm, almost like a ribbon laid down carefully by a house that has learned my footsteps far better than I ever learned its creaks. For a moment, I stood in the doorway and let the warmth reach me first, not physically, but in that gentler place just beneath the ribs, where the world settles when it stops asking for anything. I lowered myself into the chair slowly, not because I'm fragile, but because every chair in this house is at least 10 years older than my better judgment. And after all these years, we've learned to meet each other halfway. The cushion reshaped itself beneath me, familiar, forgiving, and Lily lifted her head as if to double-check whether I'd returned in one piece. I assured her with a quiet pat on her back, and she settled again, the way dogs do when they decide the night is safe enough to keep sleeping. My tea was still warm, barely, the heat clinging to the porcelain in that loyal way warmth tends to behave when the room asks it to stay a bit longer. I wrapped both hands around the mug, not because the tea needed me, but because I needed the gesture, that grounding, steadying circle that reminds me I'm here and the night hasn't asked me to be anywhere else. Outside, The rain softened into that slow, secret rhythm Seattle saves for December nights. A rhythm that sounds like a memory humming to itself. And something about that sound pulled another memory forward, quietly, like a slip of paper tucked in an old book. It was from 2004, I think, the year our heater worked only on odd-numbered days. We used to joke that even the appliances were tired of the rain. But that winter, there was a night almost like this one. Same kind of hush, same slow glow drifting across the floor, same feeling of being held by something you can't name, but trust anyway. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, reading the newspaper in that half-distracted way men pretend is concentration. I remember watching him turn a page with more care than he ever used on his shoes. The memory didn't hurt tonight. It didn't sharpen. It just arrived, sat beside me, and folded itself neatly into the quiet, like it was simply returning to the room it belonged to. I traced a slow circle on the side of the mug, a habit I've had since my 20s, whenever my thoughts grow too still. It's surprising how much gentleness resides in such a small gesture. And then, somewhere between the steam and the sound of the rain, I felt a shift, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but reveals itself in the looseness of your shoulders. A small, unexpected calm. The kind of calm that reminds me why I keep this lamp on every night, why I talk to the house under my breath, why I let silence take the seat closest to mine. It isn't loneliness. Not really. It's companionship in another form, a quieter one, a slower one, the kind you grow into the way you grow into softer preferences, wool socks, warmer light, gentler conversations. At 63, I've learned that the soul prefers whispers over declarations. The heater clicked on, a tired little sound, but comforting the way old things often are. I watched the warm air move along the carpet like an invisible tide rolling in slow motion. And just for a moment, I allowed myself to lean back fully, letting the chair cradle me in the way only a well-lived-in chair can. My thoughts drifted again, not backwards this time, but sideways, toward the things I never say out loud. There's a kind of tenderness in admitting that some evenings feel heavier than others, even if nothing happened. Not a sadness, but a weight, like the night is resting its head on my shoulder and asking me to hold it for a while. And strangely, I don't mind. I've carried heavier things. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the quiet press gently against my thoughts. The air was warm, the rain steady, the lamp unwavering, a small, faithful constellation inside this little room. And as I breathed, I felt myself settle in the slow, deep way that only happens when the day finally stops asking you to perform. When I opened my eyes, the room hadn't changed, but something in me had softened a little further. And that is the strange, beautiful thing about evenings like this. You don't notice the moment you become lighter. You only notice the moment you realize you already are. I lifted the mug for one last sip, lukewarm, but still carrying that small echo of sweetness Dorothy insists is medicinal. She has her own dictionary, that woman. The tea settled warm in my chest, quieting the last bit of leftover tension I didn't know I was still holding. And suddenly, I felt the evening lean gently toward me, as if asking permission to stay a little longer. I let it. Some evenings deserve to linger. The house sighed again, a small, familiar stretch that sounded almost like the old place agreeing with me. And Lily, still curled at my feet, shifted her weight and nudged her nose closer to the hem of my sweater, as if to say, I'm here too. It's strange, isn't it, how a night can feel full even when nothing is happening. But maybe that's the point. Maybe fullness is just a quiet, consistent willingness to stay present with whatever the evening brings, even if it brings nothing at all. The room held its breath with me, and for a moment, the world felt threaded with a gentleness I hadn't expected. A gentleness I didn't know I needed. There's a particular corner of this living room that only glows at night. A small place where the lamp's light gathers before it dares to spill itself across the rest of the floor. I don't know why the light prefers that corner. Every home has its mysteries, and I've learned not to question the ones that behave kindly. Tonight, as I carried my cup back from the kitchen, that corner felt almost like it was watching me arrive, softly, quietly, for me to return to the evening properly. I stood there for a moment longer than usual, letting the warmth of the cup press into my palms. The heat travels slowly these days, not because of the tea, but because my hands have their own opinions about winter. At 63, even my bones negotiate with the weather. The rain outside shifted again, a small change in rhythm, barely noticeable unless you've spent the last 3 decades learning the way Seattle speaks in winter. Rain here is never just rain. It's the city's handwriting, curved, soft, a little tired, but always sincere. And tonight, its handwriting has loosened, like a hand that finally found its rhythm after a long day. I lowered myself into the chair, and that little sound, I swear it has aged with me. We've both learned to creak in ways that don't need apologizing. The blanket slid across my knees, soft, warm, loyal in its own faded way. It still carries the faint scent of cedar from the box I kept it in back in 2008. Cedar has a way of holding on to years, even when everything else lets go. As I sat there, Lily lifted her head and gave me that look she always gives when she's pretending she wasn't waiting for me to settle into my evening place. Dogs, they never admit how much they care, which makes them oddly similar to some people I worked with in 1996. But Lily's eyes softened the moment the lamplight reached her. It brushed over her fur like a quiet blessing, a small warmth choosing where to land. I rested my hand on her back, and for a moment I felt the entire room exhale with her, as if everything inside these walls had agreed to let the evening be gentle. There's a comfort that grows when the day finally unclenches. It doesn't happen quickly. It happens in layers, slow, careful, like the evening folding itself open, one breath at a time. I could feel that unfolding now, in the way the light softened, in the way the rain eased its tapping, in the way my heart slowed, not because it was tired, but because it had finally found its place inside the quiet. You know, when I was younger, I thought peace would arrive like a sudden sunrise, quick, bright, impossible to miss. But at 63, peace feels more like warm honey dissolving in tea, slow, deliberate, and only sweet once you let it be. I let my eyes wander across the room. The bookshelf in the corner still leans a little to the right, a stubborn tilt it developed sometime around 2011 and refuses to correct, no matter how many times Frank has offered to fix it. Truthfully, I'm afraid if he fixes it, I'll lose the small slant that's become a part of my evenings. Some imperfections are companions. The wind brushed against the window just then, the way an old friend might place a hand on your shoulder before saying nothing at all. I've always liked that kind of presence, the quiet kind, the steady kind, the kind that doesn't need to be named. For a moment, my thoughts drifted to a winter long ago, 1996 again, when I sat by a window, almost exactly like this one, in our old duplex. The heater had been working too hard, and the air smelled like warm dust and the faint sweetness of old books. I remember holding a mug with chipped paint near the rim, watching the rain draw crooked lines down the glass. That evening felt heavier than this one, not darker, just fuller, like my heart was still learning how to hold its own weight. Tonight, the weight is different. It isn't something pressing down. It's something resting beside me. A companion, not a burden. The lamp hummed again, a small, steady glow that reached across the room and touched the edge of the coffee table, lighting up the grain of the wood in a way I hadn't noticed before. Funny, after so many years, this house still finds new ways to show me its kindness. I shifted slightly, feeling the blanket settle more securely around my legs. There is something sacred in the ritual of settling, not the sinking kind, but the I belong here kind. Lily inched closer, nudging her nose against the side of my calf in a gesture so small and so full of intention that it nearly softened me into tears. She does that sometimes, gives comfort without announcing it, the best kind. I let my hand rest on her head, feeling the slow rise and fall of her breath. That rhythm, the steady warmth of it. It reminded me that the heart always heals in the presence of something patient. The rain shifted again, changing its voice to something finer, like the difference between velvet and silk. It almost sounded attentive, and in that sound I felt a quiet truth forming, not loud, not startling, just present. A truth that said, evenings like this are not the reward. They are the practice, the daily tending to the softer parts of the heart. I thought back to something I wrote in an old journal from 2008. A small line scribbled almost carelessly on a page stained with tea. Peace isn't found, it's welcomed. I didn't understand it then, not fully, but tonight, I think I do. Peace doesn't arrive like a sudden kindness. It arrives like a familiar guest you finally learn to recognize by the sound of its footsteps. And tonight, those footsteps are slow and warm and gentle. I leaned my head back against the cushion and let my eyes fall half closed. Not tired, just resting in the same way a page rests before it's turned. The cup warmed my palms again as I brought it closer. The honey has settled so perfectly into the tea now that I can't taste where the sweetness begins or where the warmth ends. That blending, that merging, it reminds me of how healing really works. Not in moments, in evenings, in rituals, in choosing softness again and again until the heart remembers it naturally. My gaze drifted back to that corner where the light first gathered. It seemed brighter now, not louder, just more certain, as if the evening had finally arranged itself into the shape it meant to hold all along. I let the quiet settle over me the way a shawl settles over tired shoulders. Light, warm, familiar. There are nights when the world feels too wide, and there are nights like this one when it feels exactly the size of a breath. In that breath, I felt something loosen, a small untangling right behind the ribs. Nothing dramatic, nothing sharp, just relief. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but lingers. I let that relief stay. I let it become part of the room, part of the light, part of me. And in the stillness, I realized something simple and deeply kind. The night doesn't need to be extraordinary to save you. It only needs to be gentle in the exact place your heart has grown tired. Tonight, that gentleness is enough. There's a small corner of my living room that always grows a shade softer after sunset. A quiet pocket of the house where the evening seems to fold itself like a shawl being draped carefully over someone who's finally stopped rushing. Tonight, I wandered into that corner without meaning to. Some parts of the home have a way of calling you, even when you don't hear the invitation. The light from the lamp didn't quite reach the corner. It touched it faintly, the way a warm memory touches the edge of a tired mind without asking for attention. Just enough to say, I'm here. I set my cup down on the small side table, and the sound made a gentle, familiar click, the kind that feels like a sentence ending exactly where it should. Little sounds like that help me trust the night. The corner chair, old as everything else in this house, waited patiently. It always makes that sound, as though the chair is preparing itself to hold another evening of my wait, which, to its credit, includes more thoughts than pounds these days. At 63, my thoughts weigh more than my bones and take up more space than my furniture. Something about that small corner has always felt like the doorway to a quieter version of myself, the version that remembers how to breathe without instruction. I sat down slowly, not because I'm fragile, but because some moments ask to be entered gently. You don't barge into quietness. You slip into it the way evening slips into the last bit of daylight. The rain shifted again on the roof, a little faster, then slower, then soft again, as if December couldn't decide which rhythm matched its mood. Rain is moody here, but moody in a way that comforts you rather than frustrates you. I rested my hand on the arm of the chair, feeling the softened grain of the wood beneath my palm. Over the years, the varnish has worn away in the exact places my hands have rested. A quiet kind of proof that repetition isn't a flaw, it's a life. And the wood remembers me. I feel that sometimes, the house remembering even the soft pressure of old habits. As the warmth from the tea moved through my fingers, a memory wandered its way toward me, unhurried, unforced, like a letter that finally found the right mailbox. It was from 2008 again, that strange, complicated year when the heater in our duplex clicked like it was trying to learn Morse code, and the floorboards complained every time anyone took a step. The edges of that year were sharp, but the middle of it was warm enough to keep. I remembered a night when the rain felt almost exactly like this, thin, persistent, drumming quietly as if testing the patience of the roof. My husband was reading beside me then, his glasses slipping down his nose in that way they always did when he was pretending not to be tired. And when he finally drifted off, the book slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a soft thump. He He insisted he wasn't sleeping, as though the book had jumped from his hand purely out of rebellion. He was a stubborn man with a tender center he shared only in moments like that. Memory is strange. It remembers the sound of a book falling more clearly than the words inside it. It keeps the warmth of a lamp long after you've forgotten the shape of the room. As I sat there in my corner tonight, the memory didn't ache. It didn't sink. It simply arrived like a guest who didn't need to knock. The light shifted on the wall, a thin ripple of gold stretching across the paint like a soft brush stroke. The house does that sometimes. It paints the evening for me. I only have to sit still enough to notice. Then something small happened. A tiny flicker near the base of the lamp, barely visible, but enough for me to lean forward and peer at it with my usual unnecessary seriousness. A speck of dust floated through the light and rested itself on the arm of the chair. At this point in my life, dust and I are on very friendly terms. We meet regularly, and neither of us pretends otherwise. If anything, I admire dust for its loyalty. I brushed it away with one finger, not to tidy, just to feel the motion. A simple gesture, but it made the moment real. Sometimes the smallest action is the hinge that opens a whole evening. As the rain softened again, I heard the faint sound of Lily shifting near the doorway, checking in her own quiet way that I was still exactly where she expected me to be. Dogs don't need full sentences to ask if you're okay. She patted over, her paws tapping the floor in that slow, thoughtful rhythm dogs use when they're trying not to break the spell of a moment, and rested her chin on my knee. I placed my hand gently on her head, and the warmth beneath my palm felt like an exhale I didn't know I needed. Animals know how to hold space better than most people do. The evening deepened around us, not darker, just fuller, like someone had added richness to the quiet. There's something about December nights that carries a strange softness, a softness that feels older than the house, older than the weather, older than my years, a softness that feels borrowed from every winter that came before. And sitting there with the lamp humming, with Lily breathing slowly beside me, with warmth moving gently through my palms, I felt the kind of stillness I haven't known in a long time. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of enough. I leaned my head back against the chair and let the quiet gather. It gathered in layers, one I could hear, one I could feel, one I could only understand after I stopped trying. There are evenings when the house feels like a keeper of time. Tonight was one of them. Somewhere in the distance, the wind moved through the old maple tree outside the window, shifting the branches with a kind of deliberate tenderness I don't always expect from wind. I listened to it, that low, wandering tone, and found myself settling deeper into a sense of being held by something I couldn't quite name. And perhaps I don't need to. Not every feeling needs translation. Some are meant to be lived, not labeled. And this evening, this soft December night, felt like a reminder that quietness is its own kind of company. Lily's breathing slowed, mine followed, and the house, patient, steady, older than my worries and kinder than my memories, seemed to breathe with us. There, in that corner, with nothing extraordinary happening, I felt a small thread of peace tie itself gently around the moment. Not tightly, not permanently, just enough. Enough to say, you made it through this day. And that is quietly beautiful. The room had grown even quieter by the time I lifted the cup again. Not empty yet, but close enough that the warmth at the bottom felt more like a memory than a drink. Lily shifted near the chair and gave one of those little huffs dogs make when they decide the night has finally shaped itself into something worth resting in. I understand the sentiment. Some nights need time to find their gentleness. The last threads of rain had already slipped away, leaving the windows blurred only with the soft breath of the house settling into its own calm. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass, the cedar trees were dripping quietly, a kind of slow applause for the evening's patience. I let my fingers rest along the warm curve of the cup, and a small tenderness rose in me, that familiar, almost shy feeling that arrives only when the night has turned every sharp edge into velvet. You know, the older I get, the more I think evenings like this aren't a break from life. They're the part of life I never knew how to honor when I was younger. Back then, I'd hurry through the quiet as if silence were something I needed to apologize for. But at 63, silence is the one visitor I never mind leaving the door open for. It doesn't track mud in, and it never asks for coffee. The lamplight shifted ever so slightly when I leaned back. The glow stretched farther across the rug, reaching toward Lily's paws, and she lifted one eye as if approving the adjustment. A house at peace has its own way of nodding along with you. I glanced toward the bookshelf, not at any specific title, but at the soft, uneven line of spines leaning against one another, like old friends holding each other up after a long December day. There's something comforting about a shelf that's imperfect. It reminds me that warmth often lives in the things we never quite got around to fixing. The heater gave a low, contented rumble. In 2008, the heater in our old duplex used to make a noise so abrupt that I'd flinch every time it started. But this one begins its warmth the way a memory returns when it's finally learned not to hurt. I let my eyes wander to the window again. The street lamp outside had transformed the leftover mist into tiny drifting flecks, floating like small, quiet promises that the night still had a few thoughts left to share. Sometimes I think the world speaks most clearly when it whispers. Across the room, a thin line of lamplight touched the edge of the picture frame on the wall, the one I rarely mention, not because it hurts, but because some tenderness asks to be carried rather than spoken. Tonight, the light found it gently, as if it wanted to say that remembering is not the same as aching. At this age, that distinction is its own kind of mercy. I brushed my thumb over the rim of the cup, feeling the last circle of warmth inside. Funny how a nearly empty cup can feel fuller than a brand new one. Maybe peace isn't about abundance. Maybe it's about presence, warmth staying even after the moment has technically ended. At 63, I've found that many things outlast their definitions. The room breathed again, a subtle shift, the kind that moves curtains by barely a whisper, and makes you wonder if the night itself is adjusting its weight to sit a little closer. I rested my hand on the arm of the chair, letting my fingertips trace the familiar grain of the wood. It felt smoother tonight, maybe because my hands were warm, or maybe because the evening had softened everything it touched. Lily curled into a smaller circle near my feet. Her breathing deepened, steady, certain, anchoring the room the way only a living presence can. Some nights you don't need conversation. You just need companionship that doesn't demand anything. And tonight, that's exactly what found me. I took one final sip from the cup and let the sweetness linger, not rushing it, not pulling it forward, just letting it finish in its own unhurried way. The lamp glowed warmly beside me, keeping its small promise to make the night gentler than the day had been. I placed the cup on the small wooden table at my side, and the sound felt like the closing line of a quiet poem. There are endings that don't feel like endings at all. They feel like rest. The house had fallen completely still now, except for the low cradle of the heater and Lily's slow breathing. The night had gathered itself into something whole, something soft, something kind, and sitting here in this small circle of lamplight, I felt a calm that didn't ask for permission, the kind of calm that simply arrives when you're finally ready to let it stay. I curled my fingers loosely in my lap, letting the last warmth from the cup linger in my skin. The moment stretched, not long, but deeply, the way a final breath before sleep always does. Tonight, everything feels held. Sweetheart, if your evening has been carrying anything heavy, let the softness of this moment take a little of its weight before you close your eyes. The night is gentle enough to keep whatever you set down. Rest now. Let the quiet do its work. Let the lamp do what it has always done. Keep the darkness warm instead of cold. I'm here. The room is here. The night is ready to hold you softly. Rest well tonight, sweetheart. Good night. From me, Maggie. ChatGPT Kate.